1. I'm a former Brazilian Marine, 8 years of active duty, and I'd like to report a well-known story among the Marines about the disappearance of a sergeant on an island where we usually conduct military training once a year, known as Ilha de Marambaia. The Ilha of Marambaia Island, is an island that during the time when Brazil was still an empire, was a refuge of slaves who fled the farms and gathered in communities in the most isolated parts of the island. These people are known as quilombolas, and to this day they still survive on the island through hunting and fishing. At one of these military trainings that takes place every year, a newly graduated sergeant, I don't know his name, but let's call him Ricardo to make it easier to tell the story, made friends with one of the quilombolas who live there in the region, which is very rare to happen, as we are advised to avoid any contact with them, as they are known to be hostile to the military man. During some conversations with a quilombola, he told Sergeant Ricardo about an ancient story of an old treasure hidden inside a cave in one of the isolated areas of the island. This old treasure that was hidden there by a group of thieves who shipwrecked on the island many years ago, during this time when Brazil was still an empire. However, he told Sergeant Ricardo that he should not enter the cave, because any quilombola that had already entered into it never returned again, so it was known to be inhabited by a spirit who protected the treasure from outsiders. Ricardo was skeptical and did not believe much in spirits, so he asked for the quilombola to show him where the cave was. The same refused to show the cave entrance because he said that it was very dangerous. Ricardo then did not insist, and decided to forget that story and just focus on the military training. Years passed, and Ricardo didn't forget the story of the treasure on the island, and he was thinking about how his life would change if he managed to find that treasure. The life of a Marine in Brazil was very rough and the salary was low, so he dreamed of getting out of the Marine Corps one day and starting his own business, and that treasure could help him with that. So he decided that the next time he went to attend a military training on the Marambaia Island, that he would insist that the quilombola show him where the cave entrance is, even if for that he had to offer him money to show him the way. So after a few months, Sergeant Ricardo became aware that he would be chosen to be part of the next training on the island. So that would be his chance to change his life, and he would not let that escape. Arriving on the island, he attended the usual training drills and waited until the day off, which was one of the days where there would be no training, and he would have more time to explore the cave. He waited for dawn to go to the quilombola's place without anyone from his squad seeing him, since the exploration of the island by the military was prohibited by the officers, as there have been cases of military disappearing in previous training. And then he asked one of the quilombolas to show him the way to the cave. Before he went to the quilombola, Ricardo invited a close friend to go with him to help him find the treasure. This close friend is the person who spread the story that you are hearing, and said that if they found the treasure, he would share the treasure with him. The sergeant's friend refused to go, because it was very dangerous, and advised him not to go there either. He ignored his friend's advice and decided to go there anyway. After finding one of the quilombolas and insisting that they showed him the way, he agreed and took Ricardo to the entrance of the cave, where the sergeant entered in search of the treasure that could change his life. The next day, the sergeant's friend noticed that he had not returned from his search in the cave, and told the officers what had happened. Search teams were requested, and it took about a week to find the entrance to the cave where the sergeant entered. After conducting searches inside the cave, they found Sergeant Ricardo's body. Probably he was lost inside and could not find the exit, or was bit by a snake. Heavy rain on that island is very common, and normally snakes take refuge inside caves. It is said that the Marine Corps compensated the sergeant's family and hid the case from the public, so that it did not appear in the newspapers. I don't know if that really happened or not, but it's a very common story in the Marine Corps that is often told by older Marines. It is said that this story happened in the early 1990s, so I think, at the time, it was not very difficult to hide this kind of story from the media. 2. I just recently moved out of a house I had lived at for about 6 years. My family and I had moved in when I was 13, with a family friend whose parents had passed away a few years prior. Not much really happened there, other than the usual seeing things out of the corner of your eyes and such, but nothing too memorable. The way the house was laid out, you were able to see down the hallway past a kitchen galley near the back door where a half-bath was and a washer and dryer hookups from the living room. A few years after moving in, sometimes when I would glance up at the black TV in the living room, I would notice what appeared to be a figure of a young woman standing in the middle of that hallway, further down. It was just the outline of a woman standing there still, and what looked to be long black hair falling down her shoulders. Most of her was black, so you couldn't make out facial details or anything. At first I would find myself staring at it and then turning around to look down the hallway, only to find nothing. But every time I would look back at the TV, it was still there. Trying to find a reasonable explanation as to what I was seeing. Maybe coats or clothes, or maybe just the way the shadow would be cast. But nothing. I would look back up, and she was still there. After some time, I had become desensitized to it. She never moved, never made noise, she just stood there. So knowing there was no danger that came from her, I just simply ignored it any time I saw her. My parents never mentioned seeing anything, so I thought once we had all moved out that maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me back then. I started dating my now boyfriend a few months before we moved, so he had come around the house plenty of times and even spent the night once in a while. Today, me and him were sharing some of our ghost stories from our childhood, and I started to mention this story. But I didn't even get to the part of seeing the TV yet when he cut me off. He started to get really freaked out, saying that one night he had gotten up to go get his soda from the kitchen to bring back into my room. He further explained that once he went to grab the soda, he immediately felt like he was being watched. When he glanced up, he noticed something in the TV. I started shaking and almost got emotional, knowing that I wasn't the only one to have seen it. He described everything about her that I could make out, but he said he was closer to her than I ever was, and he could only make out the figure from over his shoulder. He had only seen her that one time, but it was baffling for me to realize that I wasn't the only one to ever see her. I called my dad to ask if he had ever seen it, but he said no. He said he would sometimes see someone walking around the house occasionally, but never anything back there. As of right now, we are the only two to have ever seen it, which makes this encounter even weirder to me. No explanation to this day, and it really makes me wonder what it might have been. 3. I was spending the summer with my dad after I finished kindergarten before starting first grade. We lived in a double-wide trailer out in the sticks on a gravel back road. The type of area where you had some woods to play in or head across the street to the recently harvested cornfield to play kickball or tag or some other childhood game. My dad and I lived with my dad's brother and his wife as well as their 2 daughters. My cousins were a little older than me, about 4 years or so. We decided to play hide-and-seek one evening in the woods behind the trailer. So many spots to hide, laying down behind a fallen tree, ducking in a riverbed. Heck, if you was real crafty, you could pick a tree and climb till you could see the whole area. We were on, round 3, when my eldest cousin said, "Is that an abandoned trailer?" When we all regrouped and me and her sister both shot glances in the direction of her stare, and sure enough, there was, but it didn't look that old. Just the standard moss on the sides and dirt build-up you'd expect a trailer in the woods to have. We sat there and stared at it for a sec, until my eldest piped up again and said, "You guys want to check it out?" To which me and her sister, both young and eager to venture and rebel quickly, said yes. We get up right next to it, and we can see through the kitchen window, and it's definitely abandoned. But it's weird. Everything is so dusty and disorganized, but not trashed or ransacked. Just like an unorganized clutter. We get to the front door, and oddly enough, it was unlocked. So we get inside, and the amount of dust in the air is so thick you can feel it when you breathe, like trying to breathe through a t-shirt. We get to looking around, and there's so much cool stuff. An antique rotary phone, engraved wooden cooking utensils, old glass maple syrup decanters, etc. This place was like it had been preserved in the 50s or 60s. We made our way back to the master bedroom, and it was so eerie. An old, freshly made bed with a heavy-duty bed frame, a vanity with various perfumes and makeup items, even a small jewelry box, one of the ones with the ballerina in it. We start looking in the closet, and I see this old wedding dress, preserved in clear plastic wrap, but it was weird because it looked like it had less dust on it than any of the other things. That's when a cold chill ran straight up my back, and made my every hair stand. I turned to my cousins and said, "I think we should leave now." And they agreed, but my oldest cousin grabbed the jewelry box and said, "Finders keepers," and took off with it. I wasn't going to fight her about it because I was younger and smaller and really just wanted to get out. As we're walking out, we notice one of those old candlesticks with a light bulb in it that was on the table lit up like someone turned a switch on. But there's no way this place has electricity. Immediately, we're all spooked and run out the door. As we're running away, we look back through the kitchen window again, and all we see is what looked like the silhouette of a very frail old lady, with visibly frizzy hair. But it was so dark, no features could be seen. My cousin still has the jewelry box to this day, and it still freaks me out. 4. Finally sharing this personal experience of mine because I can finally joke about it now. Kinda. As it had happened sometime last year, but as it was happening, the sheer terror I felt at the time was truly unlike any other. I had met her so unexpectedly while I was spending the weekend over at my grandparents' house in the mountains in Indonesia. She was my first ever first-hand encounter with the otherworldly, and she chose to appear when I least expected it. At a place I was so familiar with ever since I could remember. She was an uninvited guest who welcomed herself into my grandparents' home, a guest that nobody knew about but me. So the story goes. On my first night there at around 2 a.m., I finally felt sleepy enough to sleep, so I decided to go to the bathroom just right across the room I was staying at to pee before heading off to bed. The hallway was dark, etc., but nothing felt weird. It was a familiar sight, and I sensed no danger or threat, so I just walked right into the bathroom to quickly do my business. Again, nothing felt out of the ordinary. Everything was as it usually is until I opened the bathroom door to return to my room, and that door flung back on its own, shutting it again. And that was the moment I knew I was fucked. Immediately, the bathroom lights started flickering non-stop, reminiscent of a club, but in the most horrific way considering my circumstances. Without much of a thought, I looked over my shoulder because I felt a presence, and sure enough, there was a girl at the back of the bathroom, completely motionless. What's weird was that I couldn't really make out her full form, if that makes sense, or even her face because, strangely enough, she appeared to be quite blurry. Although she was within close proximity, which was probably for the better. At a quick glance, I was only able to tell that she had a disheveled hair, and also what her body frame was. She was visibly very thin and skinny, even under that bloodied and tattered long white dress she had on. Then it sunk in again. I was locked inside a haunted bathroom with a female ghost covered in blood standing still behind me while the lights are flickering. For maybe a good minute or two. That felt like an eternity. I was frantically trying to open the door in a state of panic to no avail. Mind you, all that while I was screaming at the top of my lungs, desperate for help the entire time, but unfortunately both of my elderly grandparents have hearing problems. My grandpa especially has pretty much gone deaf, so all that ruckus still wasn't loud enough to wake any of them up. I was going insane while the other two human beings in the house were sound asleep. For a second, it felt like I was on the verge of fainting due to shock and the sudden surge of fear that had taken over my body simply because these things, the supernatural, scare me down to the core. And Indonesia happens to be one of those highly superstitious and active countries with the creepiest ghost species. Although I can also feel myself shaking and my legs getting weak, the adrenaline was stopping me from fainting. To which would have been preferable, considering I could have just woken up the next day and started being in denial. But no, I just had to stay awake the entire time and have a really vivid recollection of everything. Anyways, as soon as the door finally opened, I sprinted back into my room. I just could not believe it myself. I made it back and had managed to escape alive and completely unharmed, only traumatized. However, even if that was the case, I still could not get even a wink of sleep that night because I was frightened at the idea that she might have followed me in and continue to haunt me again. Thus, I decided to spend the entire night hiding under the covers, so I won't catch sight of her, even if that was the case, because ignorance is bliss, right? When morning came, I set out to search for a fellow resident whom I've always thought was the bravest and most experienced on this topic. He lives in a separate building, a very haunted one, far away from the main house, to maybe look for some possible explanations. It was one of my grandparents' longtime workers, and I told him about what happened last night. He told me that he'll look into it and try to figure out who she was. Not gonna lie, I really just thought that what I saw was the Indo ghost called Kuntilanak, solely from its appearance. The classic long black hair and white bloody dress, and not anything else. Fast forward to the next day. To my surprise, he had news for me already. He told me that apparently, after asking around the area, he discovered that around last week there was a young lady, a motorcyclist, who was unfortunately involved in a deadly accident that killed her on impact, in a gruesome manner. Her head got sort of crushed, etc. Along the road of where my grandparents' house was situated on. My heart sank. Could that be her? The girl I saw that night. But why the fuck would she be here of all places? Okay, so this is where it gets a bit icky because a paranormal is now involved after I told my highly superstitious dad about all this. Apparently, according to my dad's long-time trusted paranormal, yes, this is a thing in Indonesia. Kind of like how each family has their own family doctor, and this man is my family paranormal. Though I've always thought he's full of BS ever since I was a kid, that had managed to communicate with her. He basically confirmed what my grandparents' worker had told me. Additionally, as a result of her very sudden death, she was unable to rest in peace. Moreover, move on to the next stage following death, to the afterlife. Hence, she resorted to showing herself to me, forcefully, which was apparently her way of seeking help. My help that night. I forgot exactly why or what she wanted me to help her with, but I seriously don't know why does it have to be me of all people in the area. In the end, the paranormal decided to just pray for her, and he either said she was moved out of my grandparents' property by him, or was able to move on to the afterlife with the help of his prayer. I can't remember because it's been at least half a year since it happened, but either way, he said he feels bad for her and pities her, so he decided to help her. Afterwards, that paranormal kept reassuring us that she was no longer at my grandparents' house, and that he has reinforced the prayer wall barrier surrounding the main house area that was weakening. Yes, you read that right. He apparently puts up a prayer wall barrier in every single one of my dad's properties, too. Even the ones overseas. Because that was how she was able to breach those wall barriers and enter through a gap. To be honest, all I care about is the fact that she's gone. I have never tested, nor have the means to even do a test anyway, of his skill, ability, powers, legitimacy. However, that was something that I chose to believe in without questioning in order to give myself some peace of mind. Besides my family members, I seriously couldn't care any less even if all that shit was made up by that paranormal, as long as she's out and never to return. End of story. Honestly, as I'm recounting all this again, in great detail for the first time in months to write this post. On second thought, I think for sure I'll be traumatized for life, all because it's been, as I said, several months, and the memory of physically being in that locked bathroom with her takes me right back, and this is enough to send chills down my spine again and again. I wish I could say I was hallucinating at the time or something, but I didn't, and I've had to live with this sort of chilling memory in my head ever since. From this time on, I have been refusing to spend another night at my grandparents' house whenever I visit Indo. As much as I cherish that place and spending time with my grandparents at their home. However, I just can't get over my trauma and paranoia, and it truly is a shame, but it is what it is. Five. Okay, so here's the thing. I am from India, and I live in a very old building. It is more than 80 years old and is basically in a very weak condition. Now, the houses in India are made from bricks and mortar, and not wood, unlike in other countries. We have been living in this house as a joint family in past, but now there are only 3 of us in this flat. And yes, there are other families residing in this building. Now, this house is not a scary or haunted house, but it's very leechy. What do I mean by that, huh? Once anyone starts staying in this building, it becomes very difficult for them to move out from here. It's just that if you plan, circumstances and things just turn out to change your plans and you stay. It's not impossible, but very, very difficult and requires a lot of willpower. But why do people want to move out? Because this building is old and shabby and turning into ruins slowly. There have been plumbing and water clogging issues in all flats of this building. And another important thing is that if you stay in this building, you won't be able to grow much in your career. See, this building, through whatsoever state, seems very cozy and comfortable to live in. It's like you have placed a filter in this world by living here. Like you will never be broke or homeless. This house will provide you a lot of comfort, which you won't find elsewhere. I just don't know how, but it does, okay? But it does consume your energy and productive power. I can feel it, and it's not just me, but even my parents have felt the same. In this house, we lived in a joint family even before I was born. Members were my dad, his sister, my aunt, and my grandparents. Our family was very good. As the children, my dad and aunt, got in their youth, the question of marriage came. My dad fell in love with my mom, and both of them dated for around 8 years before they got married. Now about my aunt. She was a beautiful young lady, pretty ambitious, and was into the teaching field. As she reached around 25, she consensually, with my grandparents, decided that she is looking forward for an arranged marriage. See, in India, arranged marriage is very common even today, though there are men and women who are forced into it. There are young people who would love to get into an arranged marriage of their parents' choice, like my aunt, who actually live happily ever after. Now, as they started looking for men eligible to get married, things started going weird. My aunt met with a few guys, went on dates, or hung out with them. She was happy and willing, but a lot of guys broke things off. This is unusual as hell because if you're a girl in your 20s in India and are looking forward to marrying a guy in an arranged marriage, 90% of the time the deal is sealed, unless of course you're a real toxic asshole of a lady. This is because there are actually many men here who are just looking for a potential bride, and would just agree to marry them right away. I don't support it, but it's just a fact. But my aunt was a literal angel. Even I call her my godmother, and she is very kind and good-natured. But she was always rejected. And you genuinely can at times look at a human and say, why would anyone want to marry her? And that is one of the reasons why my parents' marriage was delayed. When marrying in a joint family, it is generally preferred that the sister find an ideal partner first, and tie the knot before the brother, my dad, brings his woman in the house. But it wasn't just on my dad's side there was an issue. My mom's wish was also to convince her parents, as they were against this marriage strongly, and get their approval before so that they would willfully give their daughter. So my aunt wasn't getting married anytime soon, and so finally, they both got married later. My aunt finally got married at the age of 31, and she has a very good family and a loving husband. The point is, she was rejected for 6 years straight. Why? How? She wasn't that bad of a person. Or was it because these internal energies of the house that prevented her from going away? Now, I was 2.5 years old, and there were a total of 6 of us around the house before she got married. Was it because, there were 2 more people who came into living in that house? My mom and then later me, that the house decided to let go of my aunt. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Paranormal Stories, episode 363. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, hit the like button. And if you'd like early access to the videos, then support me on my Patreon, which is linked in the description, as is a link to the Hellfreezer merchandise store on Teespring. And if you enjoyed today's video, why not leave a tip? You can do that by clicking on the heart with a $sign in the middle underneath the video. And you don't have to do that, but thank you if you choose to. And before we go on, we have a little shout out to give to the author of story number 1. That is the Marine Sergeant's story, and that is W. Kretchy. I think Kretchy is correct. I did Google, and it does seem to be a last name. Thank you very much for allowing us to use your story. Alright, as there's no other business today, let's move right along to the question and answer of the day. And today's question is, those of you who enjoy fast food, specifically burgers, cheeseburgers, and the like, how many of you enjoy pickles on them, and how many don't? Personally, I am a pickle fan. A reasonable amount if it's the smaller ones, then maybe about 4 or 5 would be okay. If it's the long ones, the size kind of long ways, then about 3 of those is enough, because you're getting more pickle there. Why don't you let me know what you think in a comment below? Maybe you hate pickles, and fair enough if you do. And moving on now to the answer of the day from a previous video. And this answer comes from Paranormal Stories 356. And this question was in relation to a film or TV show that people enjoyed that was regarded as not being very good by many people. And today's answer comes from S. Nixon. And their answer was, I'd have to go with Angels in the Outfield, the one with the young Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I watched the movie a lot while growing up, and could never understand the hate the movie got. If it's because it talks about angels, I just don't know. I've always thought it was a cute and very good movie, but that's just me. Also honourable mentions on my part, I quite enjoy Last Action Hero. Oh, and Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams. And that movie just does not have a good reputation, but I rather enjoy it. Would like a Blu-ray release. It wasn't one the last time I checked. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.